Good morning from Tucson. We got young David with me. We're gonna. Or hot fox, heated filter, heated by the coolant. It's gonna heat and radiate. It's gonna heat the tank, and it's also gonna heat the fuel being sucked out of the tank. It comes out of the top and all that fun stuff. So we got some things to do here. Also, I believe tomorrow is transmission day. I need to call the guys, make sure, because I'm gonna film that entire process. Tear down and rebuild. It's gonna be fun. The mystery of the clogged filters has now been uncovered on this episode of
Hello? 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 Okay.
You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about the mother and housewife turned cannibal. Now, this one is a solved case, but it is a rough case, and I do want to just warn you that it is very graphic, and if you cannot handle that mentally or stomach it, it's totally okay. If you still want to watch true crime, there are other on my channel, or you can just go watch, a Disney movie or something and keep your spirits high, but it is definitely more brutal than some can be. Although you guys know that I don't like to, go into detail about the super brutal things, and I never show any sort of pictures of horrid crime scene photos or anything like that. So I'll just let you decide, but I did just want to warn you. And by the way, if you don't know, it is my absolute passion to share these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if it's something you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed,
So
give this video
this
a
is me
thumbs up,
just
and
getting
leave a
over
nice
up.
comment
So
down
let's
below.
do this
Now let's get
because
back
we
into
are
the
doing it
story.
live,
So it was
live,
2000
live,
in
live,
Australia, and
live,
the
live,
Price
live, live,
family lived in
live, live.
Aberdeen in New South Wales. And this was actually John and Catherine, who lived with their children. Now, this was kind of a mixed family of sorts. They had met at a club when John was already a divorcee, and he also had 2 older children who were still living with him. And Catherine, at this point, I believe, had 4 children. So they
Yo,
had a pretty
solo
big
bala,
household
pulu,
together. John
bala,
himself
bala,
was a
bala,
45-year-old
bulu,
successful
bala,
miner and a wonderful father, and he and his ex-wife were actually still friends, and that was just because she said that John was still a really great guy and that everyone around him who knew him loved him. He was the type of person who made his happiness and everyone else's happiness a priority. He didn't let hate consume him. He just wanted to go through life in the most positive way possible. There was no sense to him in just drowning in negativity. And Catherine, his wife, or his new girlfriend actually I should say, because they weren't married yet, she was actually the complete opposite, and they were opposite in looks. Catherine was a redhead and John had super dark hair. They actually met and moved in together around 1995. 5 years later, it was now February 30th of 2000, and John actually didn't show up to work that day at his mining business, and all of his coworkers were really close to him. Like I said, he was just the type of guy everyone liked, and so they instantly knew that he needed to be reported missing because he wasn't there, and he was always early, even if he had gone out drinking the night before. So they reported him missing, and at the same time, a neighbor also called the police because they had realized that John's car was still in the driveway and he normally wasn't home, and they were the type that were like very close. They would check in on each other just to make sure that they were okay. So the neighbor had gone over to his home and
this
kind of
is
knocked
me,
on the
alright?
door, called out, no one was answering, and that's when they saw blood on the doorknob. And they decided that they should probably call the police for that. The police couldn't get anyone to respond either, and they eventually forced their way into the home where they found a woman sleeping. She was on the bed, she was snoring, and that's how they found her, and they didn't see John anywhere. And they could smell a faint smell of like a homemade meal, a stew of some sort, and they thought maybe he was in the kitchen cooking. Unfortunately, that was not the case. They tried to wake Catherine, but she was not coming to, and when she did, she would still say that she had no memory of what had happened. The search of the rest of the home would provide pretty much all the answers that the police needed, because they went into the kitchen and they did find John.
7,
But he wasn't cooking.
8,
Well,
9,
technically he
10.
was, because in a pot on the stove was vegetables and his head. And there were also plates on the table that were filled with meat, the stew substance. And there were name cards attached to each plate,
2,
one for each of his
3,
kids. At this point, investigators didn't want to believe what their experience was telling them was happening here, and I mean, this was a horror movie in front of their eyes. It's not something that the investigators were just, going into a normal day and finding. This was something that was in a horror movie that was suddenly in front of them. It was found that John Price had been made into a meal for his kids to eat, and possibly his own girlfriend had done it. There was remnants of another plate that had been made, and the rest of it was thrown outside in the grass.
Yep,
But
I think this
it
is
was
good.
thought
So
that
1, 2,
Catherine
3,
had
4, 5,
eaten
6, 7,
some
8,
of
9,
it.
10,
This
10,
was a
10,
meal of
10,
potato,
10, 10,
pumpkin,
10,
beets,
10, 10.
zucchini, cabbage, squash, gravy, and her own boyfriend. She was found to have taken a bunch of pills the night before, and she was in a comatose. She would not even come to. However, they did, I think, pump her stomach, and they got her to come to, and she was either faking amnesia or she really did have it from all the pills she took, because She couldn't tell them anything that happened the night prior. The news of this horrific crime scene spread through the country, and it was huge news in the media, of course, because that sounds like such a, dramatic title. And, just like on YouTube with clickbait, that's how journalists do too. And so they did spread the story a lot. Unfortunately, that meant that lots of people who shouldn't be reading about it were, including young children. And even the officers, who were grown, had a horrible time with this. A lot of them refused to eat meat after this, after seeing what was on those plates. A lot of them had to take time off, and they also had a ton of officers who quit right after this. So the new investigators were now the ones who had to interrogate this woman who might have done this horrific thing. And nobody even wanted to come in contact with her. They were all terrified of her. After doing some digging, investigators found that John had been telling his coworkers that if anything had happened to him, that Catherine had done it. And he was also saying that earlier that month, they had gotten into a fight, and basically it ended with Catherine trying to stab him with a butcher knife, and this started to occur more frequently throughout that month, and he would actually end up calling his friends, his family, his coworkers to just tell them what was going on so they were in the know, so they could basically, back him up that this was happening, because we'll get into a little later why he couldn't just go to the police. But he did end up going to the court system, and he wanted to get a restraining order against Catherine so his own kids would be safe. And unfortunately, this would not be done in time before he was killed. The autopsy showed that John had been stabbed possibly over 37 times, and when they tried to piece together what happened that night, they knew that John had come home and he checked in with one of his neighbors, as he often did. And at this point, he also went inside and decided to go to bed. It was like 11 p.m. And so he pretty much, had dinner, got into bed, and then a little while later, his girlfriend would come home, and she would make her own dinner, she would shower, and she would go into the bedroom. But she wanted, sexual experience that night, and so they did so, and John fell back asleep. And that is when he would wake up to Catherine on top of him. John knew that Catherine had some anger and violence issues, but he had no idea that it could get to this level, even though he had mentally kind of prepared himself and known that deep down he didn't want to acknowledge it, especially more people reading about it right at that moment. And at this point, he would be brutally attacked by a butcher knife that Catherine owned. And there would be blood splatter found everywhere on all of the walls.
So this is a
blood.
model. We
He
are
would have been
basically
chased through the house, which is why there was thought to be blood on the doorknob, as though he
so this
almost
is
got
our
out
model.
but then was drugged
We are
back
basically
in.
trying
And the whole
to
place was a crime scene. It
what
was not just one small part
this
of the
person
home.
did.
When John was no longer fighting
I
back
got this
and he was
model from
already
GrabCat.
deceased, Catherine did what she had learned from her
Apparently,
job
in this
at the
model, I did
slaughterhouse where
not
she
like
had
the
worked for many
wheels,
years.
and
She
being a
then
mechanical
skinned
engineer,
him
there's some
in one
parts which
piece,
we can
and
make,
this basically
and there's some
described
parts which
as
we can't make.
a suit
Looking
of
at the
skin.
manufacturing pace.
She
So
drugged
basically, what
his
I'm doing
body
is
the rest
going
of
through
that
this
day. She
model,
wanted it, and she hung
tweaking
up
it a bit
this
to make
human
sure that it's
skin
able to
on
be
a meat
manufactured,
hook in the kitchen.
and
She
producing a
decapitated
model
his
which
head
you'll
and
be
put it
able
in this
to
pot.
just go to the shop,
Then she began to take
give them the
strips
model,
of the meat
they are
and
able
his
to
bones and make
manufacture
them
it,
into
and then you
little
walk out with the trailer.
pieces of steak. She
This
made them
is
small enough so they
what
would
I'm
fit
hoping to
into
do.
the stew that
Alright,
she was
with that being
making.
said,
The remainder of his body
it was
entered the
like
kitchen table and crossed
I'm not
his
even sure if I
legs.
can still do
At this
this,
point, she cleaned herself up and went into town and took
because I
money
did
out
hide a
of the
couple of
bank,
things,
out of his account. She came
because
back and she took a whole bunch of
top
pills
level
trying to
transparency.
overdose, or at least that's what they believed.
Yeah,
However, thankfully she wasn't successful,
because when I
and
imported
now
this
she's
thing,
in
it
custody.
had clashes.
But what kind of mother and
So
girlfriend could
let's
do this?
hide.
Why would she do this? And another question was, where was the money she took out? because they found that it had been taken out,
Yeah.
but it was nowhere in their home.
Oh,
Who had she given it to? John's family
I'll leave
was
this one.
just as
It had
confused.
clashes,
They
like
were horrified, but they didn't
there were
understand because they had
interferences
always
in
seen
there,
Catherine
so I
as this
couldn't
super
convert it
charming, kind, loving
using
woman
the feature
who was,
recognition
of
feature in
course,
SolidWorks.
their family member's girlfriend who lived with
So
him
basically
and
now
often
I'm
met
just like
with the
redrawing
family.
everything.
However, when they started to really think about
Let me
it, they
see.
realized that things were
The thing is,
strange
I
about
don't
Catherine,
want
and
to
they weren't
mess with this
wanting to pick
model
up on it
too
or just
much
didn't think about
because
it
I've
in that
done a
way.
lot.
Because they said that, they had met Catherine's family as well and that they were really rough around the edges. And that Catherine would often have these mood swings where she would very drastically
But
change her
hey,
behavior from being
if you want
calm and
modeling,
humming and,
if you want
dancing
to,
around the house to being so
let's just
angry
save it. Then
that
we'll
she
see.
couldn't control herself and that you pretty much should run from her. It was so drastic and you never knew which side you were going to get. During these rages, many said that Catherine got this strength about her that she normally didn't have, that she could lift anything or anyone, and she also had muscle from working at the slaughterhouse and having to move all of these animals about. But on a normal basis, she was just, kind of an average woman, unless she was possibly hiding her strength, because when she got angry, it just seemed like she suddenly went from this woman of average size, of average strength, to this bodybuilder who worked out 7 times a week. Yet Catherine was now claiming she had nothing to do with the murder, even though it was in the kitchen in the home she was sleeping in. Catherine had a dark past, darker than most
Dark
people would
past, eh?
expect from a beautiful, loving suburban mom who loved to participate in the activities that her children did, who had a loving boyfriend that no matter how much they fought would still want to get back with her. She seemed to have it all together. She had a job that she really enjoyed, even though most wouldn't say that they would enjoy something like that. But beneath this surface level of her mind was a darkness that many wouldn't even be able to fathom. She also had a history of love interests that were much luckier than John Price. But they also had experience with Catherine's dark side. Now let's go back a little bit into Catherine's past and see where this all started, if we can even pinpoint it. It was said that she was born in 1955 in Tinterfield with a twin named Joy. Catherine was actually born into a scandal because her mother had cheated on, her mother's name was Barbara, and she had cheated on her husband, Jack, whom she had 4 children with. And she actually got pregnant with this man that she had cheated on Jack with, named Ken. And Ken Knight got her pregnant with these twins. And they ended up running away together and leaving all 4 of her children with Jack, her ex-husband. She had met this new guy, Ken, through her husband because her husband used to work with him. And so rumors were spreading in this town, and they basically couldn't get away with the fact that everybody knew what had happened, and so they moved to get away from it all. Catherine and Joy were, having a great childhood, and then at the age of 4, their 4 siblings actually had to move in with them because their mother's ex-husband, Jack, had passed away and they had nowhere else to go. Unfortunately for these 6 children, her new husband was not necessarily thought to be a great father or husband. He was an alcoholic who would try to hurt and sexually assault his own wife when he was drunk, and he was thought to possibly assault Catherine. At school, Catherine, growing up, was known to be a bully who would terrorize the small children and do anything she could to hurt them. She was also not afraid to be mean to teachers. She would physically harm them if she could, and she felt no remorse about it. Because of this, she didn't make any
Sounds like an
friends,
evil
and she
woman,
actually
eh?
dropped out of school without knowing how to read or write at 15 years old, where she went to work at a clothing factory. However, that is when her dream job would open up, and she would be working with her father, Ken, in the slaughterhouse. She would get a job there, and she would tell everybody she had never been happier in her life, especially when they gave her her own set of knives. Her job was to cut the internal organs out of animals, and coworkers actually said they hated watching her work because she would cut the arteries just to watch the animals bleed. She would quickly learn everything she needed to know about all of this. Little did her employers know that she would later on be using this on humans as well. While working there, Catherine's life was actually falling into place. When she was 19, she actually met a man named David Kellett in 1974, and this would be her first marriage because they felt that they should get married. It was said to be a very tumultuous relationship, and nobody could really tell who, the worst partner was. They were pretty awful to each other. And David was said to be a truck driver, but he was also an alcoholic, just like Catherine's father, and he often liked to get in fistfights with her. But it was also said that Catherine didn't fear this. In fact, she loved it when he would try to fight her because she would fight back. And like I said before, she had this extraordinary strength, and she would often beat him. And at that point, he started to get scared of her. David's mother had actually told him prior to their marriage that he shouldn't marry Catherine because she had a screw loose somewhere. He soon saw what his mother was talking about when Catherine started to choke him during their wedding night because he had sex with her 3 times, and she had heard from her mother that her mother had done it 5 and wanted to, beat her or be equal, and that's what she thought was supposed to happen, and she was so angry at David for not satisfying her that she started choking him. David was already asleep when this happened, and it woke him up, and he thankfully fought her off and he survived, but then he had to come to terms with the fact that he just married this woman and had to be with her. David said that anytime he tried to, stand up for himself with any of Catherine's family members, Catherine would get really mad. She would actually beat him, and this was sometimes with an iron, sometimes with a skillet over his head. Other times he would wake up with a knife to his throat, and he just never knew what he was going to get with her if he spoke up. They did, however, have 2 children together, and David, being a truck driver, didn't spend a lot of time at home, so Catherine was kind of home with her 2 children on her own, and David kind of used his job as a getaway. They had been together 10 years at this point, but neither of them were really trying to get out because it was thought that it would be far more difficult to try to leave than just to stay in this toxic relationship, which is not true. Catherine started to suspect that he had women that he was going to see and that he was cheating on her while working. And even though David denied all of this, Catherine didn't believe him. Although it was probably a good thing that she didn't believe him because he was having affairs. And one night he actually simply left Catherine and their 2 daughters and went to be with this woman. This would lead Catherine to have a nervous breakdown. She decided she knew exactly what to do to get David back, and she was going to use their 2-month-old daughter to do so. She was said to put her daughter on the railroad tracks, and another person actually saved the baby, thankfully, before the train could come. But that is how she wanted to get the attention of David. The death, the murder of her child. During that time, she also threatened people with an axe, and she took their other child out into public one day in a stroller and was kind of thrashing it about on the road. She was wailing and she was acting very violent, and lots of people actually called the police on her, thinking that, someone needed to help her, and she was put into a psychiatric hospital. There she was diagnosed with postnatal depression and put on antidepressants. And she wasn't kept for long, but she had told a nurse something that was very concerning, and that was that she had intended to kill a mechanic. And why would she do this? Well, because he had been the one to fix her boyfriend's car, and that was ultimately why he could leave her. Not because of the woman that he was with, but because of his mechanic. But what I didn't tell you was, at this point, David had come back. He always did. They were never apart for too long, and so she had David in her grasp now, but she was still angry that he had left her before. And he was the one to go and pick her up from the hospital when she was discharged, but this wouldn't be the end of her strange behavior. 24 hours later, she would be at a neighbor's house, knocking on the door and asking them for help because her baby was sick and needed to go to the hospital. Now, they drove her back to her baby at her house, which I don't know why you would leave the baby, but regardless, they drove her back. They picked up the baby, and that is when one of the daughters that was in this family that was taking her to the hospital tried to help with the baby, and Catherine would cut her face with a knife she was holding. The family, of course, was terrified, but then they were taken hostage in their own car and told to drive to David's mother's house. And they did so. However, on the way, they begged Catherine to let one of their sons go because he had asthma and this wasn't good for his lungs, and she actually did let him go. They parked at a